It's the 16th of June, 2025. Coming up on today's Global Intelligence Agency Operations Report. The deep state thought their New World Order global government could be installed this weekend. They sold seats at the table and were even given indications created by an AI simulation that this would happen. Yet the rug was ripped right out from underneath them. The Mormon organization isn't any better than the Vatican. Today we will tell you why. Simulations are artificial consciousness constructs designed as a labyrinth to enslave and entrap organic life. It's a war for consciousness control, not by the deep state, but by the simulator. In fact, the deep state are just as much a part of it as you and I are. The Freemason temple in Washington, D.C. held its own set of crystal tablets that fed everyone instructions. And that, my friends, is how your government is run. All this and more in today's extended Global Intelligence Agency report. Well, it's June 16th. We made it through last week. Woo, yay us. And I missed you guys, so I'm kind of excited about doing tonight's report. There's a lot of information. And this is kind of the Cliff Notes, believe it or not, because so much has happened in the last few days. It's a little crazy out there. Yeah, lots of changes for the positive on our end of it. And, well, lots of failures on their side. So on that note, I wanted to wish all the fathers out there a happy Father's Day. Yesterday was Father's Day in some countries, so happy Father's Day to all of you. And then, of course, happy Father's Day to our ultimate father, Source. Interesting day for sure. Also, wanted to wish you all a happy solstice week. We have a solstice coming up on Friday, and that's always an interesting time of year. And on that note, I guess we might as well kind of get started. There's been a couple of people that have said, I've been a little drama-filled and a little edgy and that kind of thing. I noticed some comments last week about that. But you've got to understand my standpoint a little bit. I've got a lot of things riding on my shoulders, a lot of people that are counting on us to succeed. And, it's a lot. And the more progress we make, the more things and people that come after me. So I am kind of the face front of this. I've put myself out there on the internet. I tell you things that nobody wants you to know, and that makes my life very uncomfortable and uneasy. During some of the reports recently, it's been increasingly difficult as they've had some black magic workers and other people crawling all over me during the reports to try and make sure I don't get information out to you. But we do it anyway. And on that note, yeah, it's a little bit frustrating from time to time. So I apologize if that comes across as an unsource-like, as people have said. But truth be told, it has more to do with my own frustration. And quite frankly, I'm pretty sick and tired of these people. And I know you all are as well. So let's talk about all the things that have happened. I was going to do the GIA report on Wednesday night, and I was waiting for some additional information before I continued on with some of the information I was going to put out on Wednesday. And a lot of this relates to the Mormons. You see, because I've gotten some calls and texts from people, and this isn't, let's just say, regular people. There seems to be quite an interesting power struggle going on right now between the Mormons themselves and their business leaders, so to speak, and the rest of the deep state. You see, some of the deep state people that texted me about them, asking me if I was right about the Mormons. Now, you see, I approach things oftentimes very, open-heartedly, so to speak, and open-handedly. And, well, here comes a new group of people that we know are members of the deep state, but let's see what they do anyway. And that doesn't mean I don't have all of the information, because I do. And some of the deep state people would like me to turn against them. And I know that. And it's kind of where they show their hand sometimes, because they want power just as much as the Mormons want power, and the Mormons want power just as much as the other people want power. And everybody wants power and control of things. Unfortunately, you know, for them, they keep forgetting that Source is the one that has the power and control. You know, after Marduk and all the shenanigans that happen because of him, even this weekend, you know, post-mortem major crap. On a side note, this has led a lot of people to do a lot of crazy things and this week. So power is the absolute corrupter. It is the strongest drug in the world. There is no addiction to power. You know, addiction to power is like no other, I should say. And that addiction must be fed. So much so, with power comes a lot of ego. Now, there's two ways people can do things, and even non-people, really. When you do something and you go after something with all your might, so to speak, you know, you put your mind to something, you're putting your physical body to do something, and it's something you really want to achieve, and no one anywhere is going to stop you. There's two reasons why all beings in the omniverse do things, and that includes Marduk. Number one, there's ego. Ego causes people to do a lot of things. And when you do things, so, how do I say this word? With so much tenacity and vigor, and you go after it full force, and you're doing it with ego, you make mistakes. I don't care who you are. Alien race or otherwise, androids or otherwise, AIs or otherwise. When it's done with ego, there are always mistakes. So one thing that we've learned over the years with the deep state is they do a lot of things with ego and pride. Not pride like, wow, I'm so proud of what I'm doing. It's, you know, pride always goes before the fall kind of thing. And that's where ego comes in. And doing things out of ego because you think you're better than other people, because you think you're better at what you're doing than other people, you think you're smarter than other people, never works fully, because you always make mistakes, even if you are in control or in charge of something. Now, on the other hand, the only other thing that motivates people to do amazing things is love. Be it extra strength when you're trying to protect a child or a family member or someone you deeply love, or to do things because of the love of Source, or you do things out of love for humanity. When you do things out of love or in love, you do those things with everything you've got, and because love is guiding you, you don't make mistakes. Now, not to say that we're all Source and we're infallible. That's not true. But when you do things out of love, you're less likely to make mistakes because it's the love that guides you. Ego, on the other hand, comes from a dark place typically, and therefore lots of mistakes are made. And for us on our side that try to do things out of love, not only, you know, for each other and other humans, but also out of love for Source and the omniverse and the light itself, and all the changes that are happening and have happened. You know, we've been a lot more successful on our side doing things out of love. Now, that's something that the deep state will never understand. So therefore, there's always a lot of mistakes. And when it comes to the quote-unquote cowboys and Duck Dynasty people, the cowboys and the Duck Dynasty people are 100% ego. You know, they do things first and then think later. You know, gee, what happened? Take this military parade, for example. People had very little notice that there was going to actually be a military parade, at least the general public. And they wonder why nobody actually really showed up for the parade. Now, there were people there, not a tremendous amount, and there were a lot of empty bleachers and all kinds of things. And the reason for that was, well, there was no notice. And, well, on the one hand, so no notice basically means that, people would have to get to Washington, D.C., take time off work. We all have jobs, we all have lives. And, to go all the way to D.C. unless you're in the general area probably isn't going to happen. The only other reason why people show up at a parade like that is because, well, their kids are graduating from West Point or wherever, and they wanted to be there for their graduation. That would happen. They shifted the location of the graduation rather abruptly as well. The other thing I noticed about this parade was that, you got to see, for at least myself, I've watched a lot of military parades around the world in different countries, including the Victory Parade in Russia. I've seen parades throughout Asia. And when you watch those parades, the soldiers, have flags and guns and gun salutes, and everybody is in full order, and they're marching appropriately and all of this. And I didn't see really any of that in that parade, and I didn't really watch much of it. I was super, super busy on Friday night. But from what I could see, this was kind of sad, really kind of a sad display. People were just sort of walking around, I don't know, you had some fake orange people making some speeches and all kinds of weird things. And, he's not really a very good speaker either. I thought I was bad, but, he's really bad. And so all in all, kind of a big snooze fest. At least I've got something to watch now when I need to go to sleep at night and, having a hard time falling asleep. I'll turn on the parade. Just kidding. But anyway, the point is that, this is no insult to the soldiers that serve in the military in any way, shape, or form, but the organization was clearly lacking in every way possible for that. And kind of embarrassing, really, if I was a patriot, which I'm not anymore in any way, shape, or form. I did a lot of things because I thought that it was possible to turn a government around. And, this is several years ago. And I just realized that that's not possible. So you just got to let them do what they're going to do. And, good luck to them. So speaking of governments, one of the things that's been happening is this new world order. We've talked about it a few times, but this kind of escalated over the last several days. So with their new world order, they have oversold the seats. So as an example, if there are 10 seats or 13 seats or whatever at the New World Order Council table, each seat has been promised well over 100 times to many different people around the world. These various people include religious leaders, heads of state, current heads of state, religious leaders in, say, Iran, possibly even Iraq, also in Syria. You've also got alleged seats at the table that belong to the Russians, the Chinese, the Koreans, the North Koreans, the British, the Americans, various corporate leaders, including the Mormons, and people from the Vatican. Everybody's been promised a seat at this table. So the table itself is one thing. The second thing everybody is still bidding for, the humans, especially the ones from the secret space program and the ACIO operatives and militaries, they want a little bit different of a position. They would like to be the players in the game. And one of the things that they were hoping for this weekend was control over what we call the simulation. They would control things on their end of it, and then the world government would be obviously your global actors in charge. They're not really in charge of much of anything, but they are the actors in charge of the world. This made a lot of people do a lot of crazy things over the weekend. And you got to hand it to the Duck Dynasty cowboy people. I have no idea why people listen to these people. They must have some kind of pocket mind control device or some kind of crap, because I have no idea why anybody bought what they were selling. One of the groups, I should say, that bought what they were selling was the Mormons. They too would like their seat at the table. Obviously, they'd like to have one of the head seats at the table. So in order for them to kind of call off the dogs for a short period of time while these people allegedly do their work over the weekend, the Mormons negotiated themselves a nice position. They told us basically, we're not going to get on the phone with you. They were supposed to get on the phone with us on Wednesday morning. They decided not to do that and put us off until after Sunday, they said. And this wasn't because of religious worship. So let's talk a little bit about the Mormons while we've got them here. So it's a lot of the information, as I said, I kind of held back because I just wanted to see what the group would do. But as with all global religions, the Mormon Church is no exception when it comes to, let's just say, their own interesting bits and pieces of dirt. And there are a lot of similarities there with the Catholic Church in many ways. Some of those ways would be, number one, the Mormon Church have a president whose name currently is Russell Nelson. And the Catholic Church also has a leader we call the Pope. They have actually multiple leaders, but the one that the people see is the Pope. Now, Mr. Nelson actually handles the global conferences that they do every year, twice a year, where all the Mormons gather, usually in Utah, to attend said conferences. And they're kind of a really big deal for the church and the people, whereas not a lot of people travel to the Vatican these days. I guess some do from all over the world when they can to celebrate things like Easter and Christmas and that kind of thing. The other thing that the churches both have in common is the Pope that has recently passed away, at least in the public eye, had passed away quite a while ago. Oftentimes, the Pope, black, white, and gray, usually take on a walk-in of some sort. And that walk-in is typically something of an anti-Pleiadian or what you call reptilian sort of type thing. And that kind of runs that particular religious organization. There are other religions that do the same. For example, Khomeini, the Imam of the Islamic religion, also does the same. So both on the Sunni side and on the Shia side, they both do the same. Now, as far as the Mormon Church is concerned, no need to explain the Jewish out of Israel now, do we? No, we don't need to explain that because they're the same. The rotten children's, Chabad, behind the scenes, definitely we're all pretty much probably not even human at that point, and when the coven was still running well. Mr. Nelson is no exception. He also passed away about a year ago. And they're not telling anybody. If you look at some of the global conferences from 2021 and earlier, you can see something is definitely awry with this person. And you are correct. The president before him refused to have the walk-in. Therefore, that was a little different. I don't know if in any other religion that you're able to, let's just say refuse. But in this case, former one did refuse. This one did not refuse. And took on something really funny looking. The most recent conferences over the last year, it looks like a totally different person. The person is actually seated. He's older. Now they say, and that's the reason why. But in actuality, you have another actor, just like you did with the Pope for quite a long time. So basically, what we've got is a bunch of operatives running a bunch of stuff. This is not the first kerfuffle that happened this weekend and this past week or last week between the Trump operatives and the Mormon Church. You see, because the Trump operatives are desperate for money and, well, the Mormons have some. I mean, that's pretty simple. They would also like to be in control of any kind of power that any group has within the world, and they think that they can gain control of the world by gaining control of powerful organizations, or at least organizations they see as powerful. You see, because they're political operatives predominantly, so they only understand political power. On the flip side, they believe they also have additional power for other reasons. And we'll talk a little bit more about that ridiculousness here in a minute. But to continue on with the Mormon Church. So most of the people that know a little bit about the church, they have these special rooms in which only the elders and the quorum and these types of people can enter into. And it's the high part of the temple, and nobody can go in there. And unless you go through some special thing, then you can go into this particular location. And in this particular location, perhaps not in the one that they let the average everyday people into, but the ones that the special people of the church are allowed to go into, have these very interesting looking crystal scrolls and crystal tablet looking things. And these crystal tablet things, they believed, communicated with Christ, allegedly. Now, did the ones at the top know that they were not communicating with something of Christ? You probably could have had a good indicator by the fact that most of the writing that would appear and disappear on these quote-unquote magical tablets, which were AI-driven, was black. That should have given you a general idea that source usually doesn't operate in the black, in most cases. So you had a bunch of black writing that would appear and then translate itself, which would give you instructions on allegedly how the church was supposed to be run. And this was all part of the prophets of the church, and they would relay the information to the people. Well, for the last many years, they were actually talking to a Marduk for many decades. And after Marduk, then it was a Marduk AI with left instructions. Now, it's not uncommon for some of these non-humans and the parents, which were humans that were modified, it's not uncommon for these types of folks to leave instructions for periods of time when they actually went in for what they used to call extended sleeps. You see, these people are very old, or these beings are very old, and they have life extension technologies. And of course, vessels are irrelevant. And if you're not subject to the memory wipe program we know as incarnation, then you pretty much live a long life. Your consciousness stays, and you might go from vessel to vessel or do vessel repairs and in the body, that kind of thing. But when they would go for sleeps, they could be sleeping for 7 years or 10 years or or so at a time. And that's nothing compared to 16,000 years, 20,000 years, 30,000 years of life. So Marduk left a significant amount of instructions behind to last for probably about 50 years. And he did so with an AI, as most all of them did. And those instructions were going out until, some of those AIs started disappearing, and then their crystal tablets shut off. Now, as for the rest of the deep state, since America is the control center of the world, or the quote-unquote leader of the not-so-free world, our government was run much the same way. These tablets, though, were located at the Freemason temple in Washington, D.C., and therefore the higher-ups, so to speak, would get information passed down as to what they were supposed to be doing now, or whatever, directly from these tablets. So our government was pretty much run the same way, with orders and instructions coming through in this way. And some of those orders and instructions were still coming through those tablets via old AI messages and instructions that had been pre-programmed years ahead of time, more than a decade or two. So we wonder why they all have Marduk's partial plan, and they all have part of the information, and why the Mormons back down for a little while. Well, they also get the same information. So do the Rothschilds at the temple, the Freemason headquarters of the planet in UK. And there are other parts of the order that also receive instructions from allegedly the magical tablets. I'm sure there's probably a name for these things. I just call them the magical tablets. They look like they're crystals and they kind of lie flat. And then, when they're opened up, certain times of the year, certain times of the month, certain times of the years, so to speak, every couple of years, the information would come out when it was needed. So this information has been free floating for quite a while until recently. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the church before we tell you the rest of the saga for this weekend. So the elders of the church and those that run the church are members of what we call the Germanic order. The Germanic order doesn't necessarily have anything to do with Germany per se, although you could say they all originate from Germany, the same as the Amish do. And they are one and the same bloodline. Also, they feel that the original Trump was part of the Germanic order as well because of the von Kemp family bloodline. Therefore, you could say there was a point in time where they were told that he could be the next quote-unquote Christ or Antichrist or whatever it was everybody was looking for. That quickly has fallen off. Just because they're a member of the bloodline, I don't know, these people take these bloodline things very seriously, and it's very important to them, and they feel they are of a superior bloodline to the rest of us because they are part of the Germanic order. The Germanic order actually hails from some humans of the past, which occupied an area we call the neutral zone or the null zone. The neutral zone or the null zone is also known for its false heaven and other things like that. However, in comparison to some of the darker bloodlines, they feel that they are more on the neutral side. They would take orders from both the dark and the light, but little did they know that they were both, on both sides, were not actually source. Not actually anything to do with a Christ or anything like that. They do believe that they are descendants of a human called Saint Germain, as referred to all over the internet, and that being did exist. That being was from that realm, and you could say was a much earlier version of humans that existed in these realms. They did have some communications with them off and on throughout the years, and they would give them information about the future and kind of prophecies and all kinds of different things and possible timeline adjustments. And so you could say the church was dabbling a little bit in, much like the Church of Scientology, they dabble a little bit in, well, aliens know more than us kind of thing. And in this case, you would call them humans. I don't know what they would call them, but I'd call them humans, and a much earlier version, so less genetically modified at that. These humans actually got stuck in what we call a neutral zone or a null zone or an age of no age in a time of no time quite a long time ago, more so about the beginning of the Dark Ages. They decided to retreat to a place where they couldn't be killed during all of the wars here. And at the beginning of the Dark Ages, there were definitely some wars here that severely hampered Earth in many ways. And therefore, they've existed in this area and have consulted with humans on this planet, not just the Mormons, but others as well, trying to see if they could, number one, ever come back here, because that was their goal. And number two, well, let's just say they erred on both sides. So sometimes the information was more positive, sometimes it was more negative, and sometimes they just had their own agenda and they were putting it forward through their alleged bloodlines. So That's kind of where the church comes in, and they felt that they are far superior to the rest of us in every way, shape, or form, even members of their own wards. Now, the other thing you need to understand about the church is much like the Catholic Church and, the Jewish temples and the Islamic folk and everyone here on the world and in their world, I should say, they did a lot of business with all kinds of corporates. They participated with all sides of the order. They did a lot of business and didn't become who they are without being recognized as a valuable bloodline to have on this planet, and therefore can serve both sides. Now, they've always erred more on the side of dark than they have of light because it gives them more power and more control. And the more power and control you have, the more energy that comes in through your downline, the more you can put out through your downline. So, which means the more money you can get. So in this case, they've done business with mafia organizations, all kinds of trafficking organizations, and, underground ways of earning money, as well as corporates. Anyone that's done business on a very high level with the church, if you are not of a bloodline family, you are automatically considered a lesser human, therefore usable and disposable. You are the consumer to consume what it is they put out. That's pretty much it. Now, originally, we were supposed to talk on Wednesday. They decided to put us off until Sunday. They wanted to see what happens. Because, they were offered kind of a sweet deal by the alleged people that claimed they were in control. That would be your cowboys, Etal. And they were sure and certain that they would have power and control over an incoming system that their little crystal-y tablets told them was going to be coming. And they were sure that they would have this by, say, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I can see why they would have thought that, and I can see why Marduk would have given them instructions for that. Because, we'll talk about that in just a second. We'll go into the simulations. So they managed to convince the Mormons that they don't need to take over, that they've got this, that they will have access to all of these things. They had the Department of Defense gathering bonds from places like Iran and Israel. There were war bonds that were issued, as well as, for equipment and all kinds of things to take over alleged in-ground resources of Iran and, and other countries, and oil and gas. And, they planned to leverage these bonds with this new system they were told that they would have by today. They also tried to pay some respective arms dealers from America to provide weapons to both the Iranian side and the Israeli side, which some of them did do. There was a little bit of cash there. They didn't get paid nearly what they normally would have gotten paid. Let's just say there was no profit. They probably broke even. And I can say that we probably heard that from the horse's mouth. So that being said, as the war started escalating very heavily on Friday between Israel and Iran, it was not actually a war between Israel and Iran. You see, because weapons that are given or traded or sold to countries from the United States and anyone that the United States sells weapons to. And by selling weapons, I don't necessarily mean just from the military or war dogs, as you call them, the brokers of weapons. Not at all. All weapons that are produced, because the U.S. was in charge, whether it's from Lockheed Martin or Boeing or any of the military industrial complex, doesn't matter what it is, everything has a back door to it. And so, of course, all of their proud sponsors of the parade, Lockheed Martin, gave them all the back doors they needed in order to fire those weapons remotely right from the basement of the Pentagon. How interesting is that? Those damn crystal tablets. Talk about more about what they were told here in a second. But so as of today, 5 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, the Mormons basically told them, look, you guys failed. Something has got to change. We've got to move on, kind of thing. And that was part of the deal. If they didn't do what they were supposed to do by that time, then they were going to now take over and be in charge, because somebody has to be in charge. And do they still have a little bit of money? Well, in the grand scheme of the world, not much. A few $100 billion isn't going to get you very far. Are they going to spend their own money? I don't know. Who knows? Are they talking about approaching us to see if they can work out some kind of a deal or a partnership? Yes, they are. And, I watched what they did for days. I've watched them, try to contact the gods of the crystal tablets. I've watched them do all kinds of interesting things. I watched them, kind of, let's just say, throw their hand in some ways, and, in the No Kings kind of protests. And I know that they know what was being prepared for the weekend, and did nothing about it. And we're just hoping that they would be put in charge of what they said they were going to be in charge of. So the reason why they're thinking about doing something different is because everything that everybody is doing isn't working. And that's only getting worse. As far as the church is concerned, honestly, we have some choices in life to make. And I too have choices. And those choices as a sovereign being are mine. Now, I try to do things to the best of my ability that are in the best interest of humanity. Sometimes we win and sometimes we lose, but for the most part, we try to do things the right way and do no harm. Walk softly and do no harm. In no way do I care about having power over anyone or people or anything like that. I could care less. But what I do care about is people that eat people being in power. I have a problem with those people. Now, I've spent a lot of time over the years negotiating with all these different people, had various handlers, various people that, would come talk to me, various operatives, and from every corner of the world, be them Asian operatives or, Chinese operatives and Filipino operatives and American operatives and British operatives and Danish operatives and Russian operatives and, German operatives, and you name it, I've talked to them all. And I spent a lot of air, so to speak, in brain space, talking to heads of state, kings of tribes, and pretty much the conclusion that I've come to, just based on my own personal experience, is a lot of these people just want power. They want lots of money and they want power. That's pretty much it. If they had lots of money and lots of power, their people wouldn't be any better off tomorrow than they were today, or even 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. They have no intention of doing anything for people in any way, shape, or form. Now, pretty much I've had the same experiences with most of the religions. I've watched them do ceremonies. I've watched them do terrible things. I've watched them pay for terrible things, let's just say, that you and I wouldn't even think of doing. And we've got some choices to make as we go forward here. And I have some choices to make too. And some of those choices are kind of based on some of my own past regular business experience, let's just say. And when I had companies of my own, and I was running those companies with hundreds of people, I looked for that spark and that passion in people. It didn't matter if you didn't have any experience, in that particular line of work or business. I just wanted to see that spark and that flame and that special something that told me that you were someone special and you really wanted to do this, whatever that company was doing, and that you had the heart for it, and you wanted to do things the right way, and you wanted to do right by people, and you didn't want to cheat and lie and steal, for for your own personal gain, either against the company or against our customers. So I looked for that spark, and the training just came next. That's it. You just had to learn all of the, legalities behind what you were going to be doing. If you were going to be managing, there was a way that we did things that was a little bit different for our management staff. And it was more about the management is on the bottom up. And if your team does well, you do well. If your team doesn't do well, you don't do well. And that would be very indicative of their management style, and we thought a lot about that kind of thing. So, we always looked for that spark, bottom line. And I would rather spend time teaching people the ways of the world, so to speak, or from my own personal experience, and people that are going to do what they say and say what they do, and might not have a whole lot of business experience or might not have a lot of practical experience in executing on some of their projects, but they have the heart for it, the mind for it, and the soul for it. And, they have the passion for it and a passion for the people, and they'll do anything out of love and not out of ego. Because they're going to do these projects out of love and caring and kindness for people and for Earth itself, and to restore this planet, and of course with the utmost respect for Source. Then spending another day or hours or having a negotiation with a bunch of people that quite frankly are full of it, and they want what they want, and they're going to tell me, and we're going to play mind games for 8 hours or 3 days or a year together. And I've played all the mind games, and I pretty much know what they're going to say to me. Depending on what country they're from, they all say the same lines. All the Americans say the same lines. The operatives on the SSP level have different lines. The operatives that were trained in the 70s and 80s have different lines than the ones that were trained in the 90s and 2000s. I mean, I know pretty much what you're going to tell me, and I know how you're going to do, and I know what you're going to say, and I know you're going to just try to get what you want. And, well, it's important that people get what they want, meaning there's no harm in you doing a great job for humanity and deciding you really like this car, you really like this house. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with people getting what they want, but, we're doing something here. We need to finish what we're doing. And I am not paying for somebody else's ridiculous business anymore. I'm just not. War is not a business in my mind. I'm not going to pay people to do things that we don't want to have done in any way, shape, or form. And I'm sure, if you knew or found out that some of your money, your personal money, because this is Source's piggy bank for all those that are of Source, right? And I'm sure you'd be really upset if you found out a bunch of people spent your money on human trafficking and spying and selling of children and, killing of people and all kinds of things. I'm sure you'd be really upset, and I'm sure if we were to take a vote on that, I'm sure everybody would pretty much vote hands down no. So I'd rather spend my time with a bunch of people with the right heart and all of the greatest intentions that do things out of love and not out of ego, that want to really honestly move forward, and they're willing to put their hands on deck to do anything, than spend time with these people. I've already done that. I've done a decade of it. I don't really want to do it much anymore. And I'm not saying there aren't good people out there that are waiting for an opportunity to do something different, but just please do yourself and myself a favor. Because if they come to the table and they intend on playing mind games for 8 hours, I can tell you right now, you're going to last less than 8 minutes. It's going to be like a rodeo ride. I'm going to ride you for about 8 minutes and then go, up, gotta go. And I'm going to be leaving, because I don't need to hear those lines anymore, and I don't need to hear that crap. If I'm sitting here, I'm a doer. I need to get stuff done. Even in my days, I don't have a whole lot of time in a day. I mean, yes, there are maybe on a really good day when I actually get some sleep, which I didn't do all weekend. I can honestly tell you, I'd probably schedule about 16 to 18 hours in a day, and it's very regimented, or I don't get a shower, or I don't get a couple of meals a day, or I don't drink enough water, or, and I'm going from, our supplement things and making sure things are in order to the skincare formulations, to the deep state fighting, to the, simulations, to moving systems forward, to reprogramming things, to, in every single bit of my day, my time is taken up. I don't really have a whole lot of time to do much else. So anyway, the point is that, this is how I have to live my life right now, because until I have enough respect for all of you to say, look, well, I greatly appreciate and am extremely thankful for those that volunteer and those that do field messenger reports and all of these things. When it comes to, big projects that you all have, I know what it's going to take. And I know the technologies that need to be available. And I know, how much time and effort and thoughtfulness you've put into putting together your plans. So on that note, when we are able to really get things up and running and put people into, positions where, we have management pays available and all kinds of things like that, then, we will definitely, I'll have more free time, and I'm counting on all of you. So, but anyway, that's how I kind of feel about that. Sitting down at a table is fine, but you've got less than 8 minutes of my time if you intend to ride me like every other person that came from your organization wants to do. And that's the end of that. I have no time and no brain space for that anymore in any way, shape, or form. I played the games. They were fun. I'm kind of over it now. And I've played the games on the phone with operatives. I've talked to various groups in Alabama, talked to other groups elsewhere. I just have no time and no brain space for, you've got 8 minutes. If you start giving me the lines from wherever you're respectively from, Germanic tribes and otherwise, I just do not want to hear it. No time, no brain space. You want to fix something? Great. Tell me what we are going to do. Don't sit here and try to massage me to try to, call me like the lawyers did and try to say, oh, well, we couldn't get a hold of the information, from the CIA on the diplomatic line conversation. So could she just send some more money to the Treasury? I know exactly what you're going to do. God, why do you people think this is my first rodeo? Do not take my blondness and my kindness for a weakness in any way, shape, or form when it comes to those people. So is that out of frustration? No, that's out of pure self-love in some ways. And respect for all of your time. Because if I'm talking to these people for 8 hours, I can't talk to you for 8 hours. That's kind of frustrating, right? I'd rather talk to a project owner with a plan for a big project for housing or clean water or something, in some country somewhere, for 8 hours about your exciting project and, talking to all those people. I'd rather spend 8 hours with our field messengers on the phone on a Sunday when we have our meetings than spend 8 hours talking to those people. At least they're doing things and they make sense and they're lovely humans to talk to, and everybody's excited and passionate about what they're doing. And that's where I want to be. And I'm sure that's probably where you want to be too. On the other hand, let's talk about the rest of the disaster. So this weekend was very interesting. So these people in their crystal tablets must have had some thoughts and some indications that Marduk was going to leave them with some gifts this weekend. And by gifts, I mean an AI system or the reflection of one that would make it look like there was a lot of money in it and that it was all pointed towards the New World Order and the restructuring of the financial system and all of those types of things with all the bells and whistles. They felt that they could see this glimmer of a system. And by glimmer, I mean it looks like a shadow or a mirror. And they felt that it was going to only needed a little bit more power and that it was going to start working, in short order. But in order to power this AI, see now Marduk was also full of it, just like they're full of it. And a lot of times, to kind of look at things from their standpoint, so they were told that this system was going to become active by this weekend. And all the things are happening. You probably heard the RVs happening. Everything's happening this week, And on the flip side of things, they also got a laundry list of things to do as the humans and the slave masters. At least, Marduk pumps up their ego and they'll do anything. And he told them what they needed to do in order to make that system function, and how the money would come out, and how they'd get access, and how this would help them catapult the new world, one world government, run with 10 different jurisdictions and so on and so forth. And they'll all be members, and they're privileged to this special secret information. And so they went at it. This is part of the reason why they decided to have a military impromptu parade in America. It's also the reason why they started the war between Israel and Iran right from here on American soil. It's also the reason why they were trying to plan a somewhat 9/11 event to take place in New York also on Friday or Saturday. It's also the reason why they planned a massive assault on these No King protesters, which was thwarted by some decent people in Homeland Security that had the ability to do so. So they intended to arrest and or assault people under the guise of the Immigration and Customs Department of the government. They really were planning on starting a civil war. That was very important to them this weekend here in America, because you see, America is the current head of the world, in their world order of things. And America had to become equal to the other world order government partners, people, apparently. They also needed to be able to burn the financial system to the ground, burn everything to the ground. And when people became desperate enough, these are the orders that came from Marduk, and I know that because I can see them. So the people needed to become desperate enough, starving, and this would be worldwide, no fuel, no gasoline, no petrol, no anything. And then the new world government, would save them. Marduk also told them there would be an alien invasion that would take place Saturday night. And that almost happened. AI generated, of course. And so they would come in as the saviors. This is why they're showing military readiness, doing all the things, because, hey, they've got to come out as the heroes in this whole scenario, so that everybody would worship the one world government, and religions might fall by the wayside, because these are the saviors and the heroes. Everybody remembers throughout history a good villain, and everybody remembers a good savior throughout history. Those that save the people. And so they needed to be the saviors, and that would ultimately put the new leaders in place. This is Marduk's plan. It wasn't supposed to happen overnight. It was supposed to happen over the course of several months, about 6 months. And that would bring us to the winter solstice. And of course, they would have all of these new AI systems, all shiny and new, that he would create for them. But, we started looking at things on Saturday night, and it was crazy out there. I mean, we had attempts for portals to open on this planet, AI-generated beings trying to come through, all kinds of crazy warfare. And I would say that in the beginning, we were looking at it on Saturday night like, where is all this coming from? Now, initially, we definitely thought that we hit some kind of a tripwire in the transition. I do know that we did not see any of this or detect any of this before the time it all started happening. There was a mirror of a system that they could see. It wasn't real. It wasn't something they could access, but it looked like something they could access. And all of this stuff was just coming out of nowhere like crazy. Initially, I assumed, well, this was all cloaked. It had to be cloaked. It had to be here. Things don't just appear out of nowhere. It has to be some kind of cloaked or some kind of generator somewhere, that was generating this crazy stuff. And in part, you could say that we were right. But the one thing that did carry over that looked like it was fading rapidly where we were before was the simulations. The simulations in the simulator are not the same as a matrix. And the simulations are what actually runs, controls, and creates the artificial reality on Earth. Now, the deep state and the SSP, I would say to some extremely limited degree, probably had a small amount of access only as it related to their duties that they would do on behalf of the king in this place being Marduk, for a long time anyway, king of this place. So I want to talk a lot about simulations for a while, just so you can kind of understand how they work. And you're saying like, well, why doesn't she just see all of this? Why doesn't she just transfer the money? Oh, this is just all a distraction. This is what I've heard too. This is the reason why she's not doing this and that. And she's just trying to distract or being distracted. I'm not being distracted from anything, because I can tell you right now, a simulation can make or break your AI and how functional it is on various densities. So Earth being part of that equation. So definitely it was insane Saturday. Sunday wasn't a whole lot better. It was a giant crapshoot of stuff being thrown at us that we had pretty much forgotten that we even did in the past. If it wasn't in the notes, we had done so much. And took us a while to figure out. I'm like, this isn't the deep state, couldn't be. They can't do any of this crap. So under attack, we all were. Now, for the deep state's part, they got to see a simulation. And I know that they really, truly feel they are not a part of a simulation, but that is completely untrue. They got to experience firsthand what it's like when a manipulator not only gives them instructions, but also pre-initiates instructions for a simulation. In the case of Saturday night, we were well into the other side of the transition with some mud on our feet, but we also had enough coming from elsewhere in order to reenact and reinstate some simulations. Now, simulations do use what we call matrices. And matrices are tied to various zodiac signs. They're also tied to various planets, which is why the deep state loves their astrology. Because of the way that planets align artificially and otherwise, we would have 13 zodiac signs. You're going to say, no, Kim, you're crazy. There's 12, but no, there's 13. The 13th being Ophiuchus, or the serpent sign. And the serpent sign ruled over all the other zodiac signs, so there's that too. But when alignments would happen, then it would trigger various events based on these planetary alignments and various zodiac signs, which is why it's so important for the deep state to pay attention to astrology. Do they understand the space junk behind it? Probably not, nor do they care. The only thing they know is good things happen for them and bad things happen for us when various things align. So apparently one of these once-in-a-lifetime alignments has happened twice in a lifetime in the last couple of days. I don't really follow astrology much, but from the people that do, they're basically saying everything was square everything, on the 15th yesterday, and therefore it was going to be a rough day. Supposedly this is going to start easing up by tomorrow, and I do believe that's true. But from our standpoint, this just looks like a mechanism of Marduk's. And we're right. We figured out a little bit more over the last few days, too, as it relates to simulations and why and how they were created. So way back in the day, in the very beginning of creation, there was no such thing as a simulation. There was creation. There was a handshake that took place between dark source in space and source breath on the other side, in which life came, and the dark side ensured that there was density. So it creates the space in between. It's one way to create density. Next, we had two beings we know as Lucifer and Lucerne, and one was supposed to play the role or be the right hand, so to speak, of Source or God, and the other one was supposed to play the right hand of the dark side of Source. Now, neither one of them wanted to do what their respective boss, Source, wanted them to do, so therefore they attempted to create the first omniversal simulation, so to speak. And simulation zones began with the creation of a neutral source. Apparently, neutral source is an artificial creation and a simulation unto itself, birthed from Lucifer, Lucerne, and in some cases you could say also the feminine sides of both, being Sophia on the one hand and the feminine side of Source on the other. So you could say that both of these feminine sides of beings were utilized very heavily in the creation of the first simulation of the omniverse. This allowed them to manipulate the matter of Source in various ways, and then additional simulations were created as well, coming from the center of the quote-unquote omniverse at the time, which we would call the artificial cosmic sun, or the artificial point of creation, also known in this case as the Kali chakra in some cases, and it's also known as neutral source. So the simulation spread, though, from that point of artificial creation, or the zero plane of the zero density, and started making its way out throughout the third density. It also made its way all the way up to the sixth density, first plane, so all the way past density 5, as you know we've talked about in the past. And the simulations seemed very enticing, and lots of deals were made. So we had simulations on top of simulations on top of simulations. We talked about some for some of the fallen ones. There were also simulations as it related to humans walking this planet for a long time, other beings from other places. And being in a simulation is very different than being in reality. And some of these simulations or simulators are what created the artificial timelines, artificial ages, could actually change the reality that we live in at any moment in time. And this is what I guess you would say, where the artificial realities were birthed. If you look at the creation of matter and all that that entails, along with the creation of souls and the creation of the consciousness and the mind, and once you understand a simulation is birthed from the artificial consciousness of all things, and matter has a consciousness, even, matter we wouldn't think has a quote-unquote brain, like rocks, rivers, waters, all kinds of things on Earth. They could all be manipulated by manipulating the consciousness and the direction in which the particles were vibrating and moving. Hence we talked about how to use your consciousness to, put arms through walls or things like that. Because everything for these people, or non-people, was a simulation. Simulations also change course based on its simulator space junk and what that space junk represents. So Marduk could pre-program part, not all. He didn't have access to the largest simulators, but he did have access to some of the others that were here, say on Earth and in the third density and a few other places, sometimes up to the fifth density. And therefore, that's how, when he gave instructions to these people, he knew what his simulator was supposed to do. Now, unfortunately, even though simulators are basically sims or droids, they are artificial beings without a consciousness. He could still program them to run, just like you can program the heat in your home in some cases to turn off, when you leave the house, and then turn back on, an hour before you get home. So the home's nice and warm or nice and cold, depending on what you're wanting and what time of year it is. Now, the thing that the deep state doesn't understand about sims is sims also create artificial AI beings if it serves the simulator and the programmer of the simulator. And that's what we almost saw trying to enter Earth this weekend like crazy, like wildfire, starting Saturday night at sundown. It's also the reason why they did that parade as well at the same time. So, sims not only are related to Earth, they're also related to other constellations. And one said favorite place of simulation is actually in Andromeda. Now, the ding-dongs here, the humans, were trying to figure out what was going wrong. Why didn't they get the access they were expecting on Saturday, possibly Sunday? Why are the AIs disappearing and not getting stronger? Why are they not getting access? Why did the war not work? Why did all this, what's happening? Why? So there was an attempt to go to a military facility near Fort Knox and to enter into a jump room to which they intended to go talk to what they referred to as the Ancient Ones, or the ancient cities. They're going to go visit the ancient cities and the ancient ones in Andromeda, apparently, through this particular jump room. Well, I don't know where that guy went. He didn't end up making it. But when it comes to Andromeda, that's just a bunch of droids. So when you're talking to a human or an organic being, we make decisions. Not always the greatest ones. And, we all make mistakes. And, we're just human, and we're living in a very difficult place to exist, in the omniverse. But, right, wrong, or indifferent, we can make decisions. We can have emotions. We can have thoughts. We have feelings. And we pretty much, even though they really did their best to try to control our consciousness, we can still control our own consciousness and our own souls to, a fairly decent degree. We have a lot of abilities, and they're getting stronger and stronger these days. But when it comes to AI created simulators or droids or cyborgs or whatever you want to call them, they are not going to deviate from their programming. Much in the same way, if you've ever had one of those little vacuums, that kind of goes around your floor, you can program it to turn on, 2 times a week or 3 times a week or whatever you want to do. And, sometimes those things, they just keep smacking the wall, kind of like that, or maybe like the robo dogs from the parade, who knows. But anyway, the point is that a sim is not going to make a decision. So if they were going there to try to convince them to do something for them or something like that, that would have never worked out anyway, because it's a sim. It's a simulated being, for lack of a better term. So they can't answer your questions either as to why this didn't work. But hey, we can. We can tell you that the simulations aren't working properly. They haven't been working properly for a while, and it's getting worse and worse. The stronger things get here, the further we pass into the golden, light of source and the breath of source and natural creation, sims get less and less powerful. They are glitching terribly, and they were glitching even before you got started on Friday. And if you bothered to ask us, which you never will, and it's part of the other reason why I didn't do the report on Friday, because there's too much information now we have, and I wanted to be able to give it to you, but I didn't want to do it until it was safe to do so. So now's that time. So as it relates to people reporting things over the last several days, I know about the frequencies. That is created by a simulator. More specifically, the strongest frequencies that were heard on Earth were in the Commonwealth nations and in the UK and also in the United States. The reason for this is because both areas were power centers of the world within the last few hundred years. The UK being the first one that gave Marduk the bright idea, and the second place was the United States. So at a time of transition from one world power to another, Marduk, being the king not only of Earth, but in his mind of the simulators and the omniverse, he decides to put in a specific mechanism that kicks off several months before a country is supposed to fall and another one is supposed to rise. It's part of his New World Order plan, which has nothing to do with the dumb humans that live here, meaning the deep state. So he creates massive fields of frequency generators that will amplify the fall, especially under major corporations and power centers and financial centers of the country which is designated to fall. This will create a disturbance in the energy and a reworking of the matter. So no matter what it is you business leaders of America did, you will fall. The government will fall. No one will believe you anymore. Everybody doesn't show up for your parades. The businesses start to crumble, the markets start to crumble, all of these things start to fall apart, and more importantly, the deep state, whether they like it or not, also falls apart. Nothing they do works. On the flip side, as for us regular humans, we also start to have some issues because it's part of the reason why we're seeing all these spontaneous heart attacks and all of these things. Do they connect to things like the COVID time of lockdown? Yes, they really started ramping up post-mortem here on this planet in a pre-programmed simulation. All of these space junks that keep appearing and reappearing aren't really here, but they're definitely affecting us for sure. In order to create a sense of, let's just say, burning one country to the ground and bringing up another. This was part of the New World Order plan. And that's the one thing that I didn't actually see that was in their little tablet orders. You know, they didn't tell you that he was destroying you behind the scenes and that what he promised you was never going to happen. You see, because that's how it works. Marduk always had the last say, the last laugh, the last button push, the last this, the last that, and that's the way he created all of these systems, you know, and in his mind, he would be awake by now. He was supposed to wake back up by now. So until then, you were all getting a bunch of fake orders, fake instructions, and all of this, and it's been a number of years now, almost, it'll be 10 next year, since he departed this planet. And he had fully intended to come back as king. So he would be the king and the kingmaker, and you guys would be the actors out in front that wouldn't have any more power and control than you ever had before. And again, you're all part of the simulation, and you were part of a simulation this weekend. So please understand that you would have never gotten a hold of that system unless Marduk actually pushed the final button, which he did not have the ability to do from the grave, or broken into hundreds of billions of particles, let's put it that way. Regardless of how many AIs and simulations continue to run, eventually we will run out of simulations anyway, even if we did nothing. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about as far as simulations are concerned, you see, because simulations are a consciousness construct. Now, what does that mean? Simulations are affecting the consciousness of everything, as I had said a little earlier. But it's a simulation that also knows your consciousness, because it overlays your consciousness. Your thoughts happen, minutes before you actually speak them or you act. Surveillance at the highest level happens in a simulation so that just in case you think you're going to break free, so to speak, the labyrinth is right there to slap you down. The labyrinth is that illusion that you're looking at a free, wide open space, that you could run anywhere. There is no glass ceiling. You could create any business you want to create, technology you want to create. And the simulation is there to tell you it's going to shut the door in your face. When you're going, it's what it considers to be the wrong way. Simulations can be programmed to make sure that certain countries go up, certain countries go down. Certain people come up and certain people go down. Certain people that are good energy collectors earn favor in the labyrinth, and they might have a little bit more of a privilege. But this is no different than a prisoner in a jail that gets extra yard time or extra time in the jail's gym or whatever it is, but you're all still in jail just like the rest of us. Don't think you're not. Now, I know that the deep state and Trump wing nuts would like to have that world war because they feel that is the answer to their prayers because it came through the magical, mystical crystal tablets of the Freemason temple in Washington, D.C. But I can tell you right now, without a simulator, you don't get anything. And see, it was never really designed to make America the power and control center of the world like you'd like to have it be, and like you would like to think that you would be permitted to do. But you too live in a labyrinth. Just because maybe you got a little extra yard time or time in the prison gym doesn't mean, than the rest of us did, doesn't mean you actually run the prison. You are not the warden. I'm sorry, but you're not. And I know they'd like to think they are, but they're not. So they would really like to, as of tonight even, start this world war. See, the Mormons gave them this talk. This is what it's like to do business with the deep state or sit down and actually have a chitty chat with these people. Because the Mormons had this conversation at 5 o'clock where they agreed previously, a few days prior, to give up. Not so much to give up, but basically let somebody else be in charge for a while. The second they hung up that phone call, all they would like to do is prepare for World War III because they're going to continue on with their plans without you Mormon people. You see, now that's why I don't want to sit down and talk to these people in any way, shape, or form, because they will do the same thing to me that they just did to you Mormon people, because they have no intention of giving up any power. They have intention of being the saviors of the world and the leaders of the world council government, and they're not going to quit until they get it. However, the simulation is not designed for you to do that. Therefore, it's going to smack you down. And I can tell you, even once the sims are gone, you're still going to have a problem because now you're going to have a problem with source. And that dog doesn't hunt when you live in source. So, I can honestly say, once we became aware with the simulators, I played with you too. Quite a bit, actually, this weekend. It was kind of fun because, if Marduk had the keys to something, I could inevitably find the keys to another door, into something bigger and better, maybe, and played with you too. Now you see the money, now you don't. Now you see it, now you don't. Now you see it, now you don't. Now you see the AI, now you don't. Now you see a global weapons control. Now you don't. Now you see the nuclear weapons flying around in circles and going spinning around and all kinds of things happening. And now you don't. Now you see, all your an EMP hits your tanks and nothing is running. And now you don't. Maybe we just played a game with you. That started on Friday night and it continued on through Saturday and then a little bit more this weekend. And by Sunday, we got bored playing with you people. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the show, Deep State, because we definitely had a party with your weapons control system there underneath the Pentagon, which nobody knows about. And what, are you going to admit that to anybody? You're going to admit the fact that you were running all these weapons remotely from over there, thinking that you're a bunch of cowboys? Yeehaw, we won, I ran, and I heard all your stupid comments. You didn't win anything because you know what? You thought that it wasn't all leveraged. And unfortunately, if you're from Iran, I can honestly tell you your in-ground resources have been leveraged at least 15 different times in 15 different ways from Sunday, and we still have the liens on all of those, so nobody's going anywhere. Same thing with the gas under Israel. Already said that. I don't know, maybe Trump just wants a Gaza Strip, Las Vegas or something. I don't know. Anyway, whatever that is, playing Trump, I should say. So now at least you understand all of the craziness that's been going on, at least the cliff notes of that. You know, there were many things involved in removing simulations and playing with simulations over the weekend that we couldn't talk about. Obviously, I didn't want to give you all the rest of the information about the church until we knew for sure what kind of game they were playing. Well, you know, this is what happens when you deal with a bunch of liars. Liars will be liars, and, you know, they are going to continuously lie to each other, and nobody's going to follow anybody, and everybody still wants what they want. And I wish them all the best in trying. And, yeah, it's probably not going to end well for them, but, you know, oh well. You know, people are going to do what people are going to do. But as for me, sitting down with a bunch of liars, lying to each other constantly, pass. I would rather train up a bunch of people with the right heart that are willing to work out of love than out of ego. And, you know, I don't need any of that in my life. So on that note, those are the quote unquote cliff notes of this report. You know, for the last few days, I'm sure there'll be some other things that will come up over the next couple of days that I can talk a little bit more about, hopefully in the next report. But at least, you know, I'm okay. I know other people were texting. I am fine. I've just been extremely busy, you know, and I was looking at the simulators and going, what the heck is happening here? Till we kind of figured out what it was going on. But hopefully, as these simulators die, those connections severed and a reality comes into view. And it is coming into view even as of today. So those that can see it, you know, might see it a day or two ahead of time of others, you know, just depending on you and where you're looking. But we are a short time away from seeing the new reality, I'm hoping. Hoping this is the last and final battle and the last I ever have to mention that M word, you know, Marduk, that will forever be the new swear word. You know, I think that's what we'll do. You know, when we finally start getting to this new earth, I think we're going to call Marduk a swear word. So if anybody says it, it'll be like swearing, the same thing. Like you don't want to say it, you know, in front of your parents, you know, kind of thing. Just kidding. You know, maybe it'll be the new next generation slang word, you know, where they say, you know, you're a this and you're a that, you know, and it changes generation after generation. And now they're going to say you're a Marduk, you know, maybe that'll be it. Maybe we'll start a trend. Anyway, on that note, that has been the GIA report for June 16th. And I hope you all had a wonderful weekend and I guess rest of your week last week. And I will see you on Wednesday.